Hi, everybody. Happy to have you here with me this evening in the locker room. I'm Alan Locher, and I am thrilled to welcome back a true soap lover, mother of three, wife, and New York Times bestselling author, and my friend, Alina Adams. Soap fans know her name well from her As the World Turns and Guiding Light tie-in novels, Oakdale Confidential and Jonathan Story, to her passionate chronicling of daytime's most iconic moments. Alina is a woman who not only grew up watching soaps, but learned English through them and built a career celebrating their storytelling power. Tonight, we're diving into her brand new novel, Go On Pretending, which is out today and available where all books are sold. The story is a sweeping, multi-generational story that blends soap opera history, political upheaval, and deeply personal journeys across three generations of women. It's a book that takes us from 1950s television studios to the fall of the USSR and to the front lines of the women's revolution in Syria, all while pulling us into a world filled with secrets, ambition, and legacy. We'll also talk about what it's like to write real-life soap legends like Erna Phillips and Sharita Bauer into fiction, why she felt now was the right time to revisit the world of soaps, and how her own life inspired much of this remarkable news story. So sit back, get comfortable, and help me welcome the endlessly talented and always entertaining Alina Adams to the locker room. Hello, my friend.
Hello, I'm so excited. Usually I'm watching these. Now I'm actually a part of it.
Well, it's been a while since you've been here, but congratulations. It's release day.
Yes, it is May 1st, which we actually picked on purpose. It's May Day, which was a major holiday in the Soviet Union. So we figured, why not? Let's lean in and do this.
Oh, that's a very smart, very smart. Smart to do it on that day. How does it feel to, have it out in the world?
The thing about writing is you sit alone and you put scribbles on a piece of paper. I once heard a description of reading as people staring at dead trees and hallucinating wildly, which I thought was a really interesting way to describe reading. So you make these squibbles and you tell these stories and you send them out into the world. And maybe 2 years later, suddenly they're tangible, but you've been living with them for 2 years already. And you've been doing all this stuff to try to get ready for the launch and promote it, that when it actually happens, it's almost unreal. Because this day, May 1st, 2025, I've said it over and over and over again that the fact that it's actually here is sort of difficult to completely grok.
Do you actually still by
mean write
hand?
by hand? No, I actually type. I type faster, but I write my notes by hand. And there's been a lot of cognitive research. I mean, as you know, in my other life, I also read about education. So I could actually cite you a bunch of studies that say that human beings actually do much better when they take notes by hand than when they take them on a computer. I mean, think about it. Our lizard brains were not developed for Apple products. Our lizard brains were barely getting the hang of writing. I mean, writing is still such a new thing for us, glorified apes. So the idea that our brains can take in information through computers is actually very new, and people do much better when they take notes by hand.
Not for us writing. Like, I can write. I actually have great handwriting, but I am working with young folks who do not write well.
Oh, absolutely not. Well, I have 3 kids. So my oldest, the 25-year-old, can read cursive. The 18-year-old cannot, because it's just something that in between, the 8 years of schooling, the oldest one still learned handwriting. She can't read script. I once read something that if you really want to confuse young people, is lock them in a room with a rotary phone and instructions on how to use it written in cursive. They'll never get out of the room.
Brilliant. So tell us, what had you go back to the world of soap operas for Go On Pretending? And Mazel Tov, the fact that this is your 20th book.
Oh, thank you. Yes. So my last 3 books were historical fiction, and they were Soviet-based historical fiction. So in July of 2020, my book, The Nesting Dolls, came out. By the way, if anybody ever says to you, hey, want to release a book in a pandemic? Go, no. It's not a great idea, but that was already, it was scheduled. Everything was set in place. So it came out in July of 2020, and it was set during 3 time periods. It was set during the 1930s in the Soviet Union, which is during Stalin's Great Terror. And it was set in the 1970s in the Soviet Union, which was during the Refusnik movement, and it was set in present-day Brighton Beach. The feedback that I got from readers is the part that they found most interesting was the one in the 1930s, because for obvious reasons, Western Europe gets the bulk of the press of the 1930s and 1940s, and people had no idea what was going on in Eastern Europe in the 1930s under Stalin, where also millions and millions of people were killed and imprisoned, but people just didn't know that because Western Europe drew most of the attention. So when I did my second book, the one that came out in November of 2022, My Mother's Secret, a novel of the Jewish Autonomous Region, I set the bulk of it in the Soviet Union during the 1930s and 40s, because that is what people found most interesting. And one of the peripheral things that I had mentioned was the fact that there were Americans who during the 1930s moved to the Soviet Union. People who literally sold their possessions in the US because you had to pay the Soviet Union for the privilege of moving there, and moved to the Soviet Union. People said to me, that's impossible. Nobody would ever do that. I said, well, first of all, they did. So when it came to go on pretending, I decided to focus on who were these Americans who would have picked up and moved to the Soviet Union. Oh, I set the story a little bit later in the 1950s. And I started thinking about who would move to the Soviet Union. And then, you know how they say, write what you know? So I sort of looked around my house, said, hey, who lives in my house? There's me. And so I was born in the Soviet Union, but my husband is an African-American. And we got married in 1999.
No.
And yes, 1999. And so when we talk about, like, when we meet interracial couples who are like 20, 30 years older than us, we always say, oh, they got married back when people cared. Because by the time we got married in 1999, there's still pockets, but really nobody cares. But in the 1950s, people cared. So I started to think an interracial couple would believe the propaganda that was coming out of the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union was saying, we have no racism here. We've outlawed racism. We've outlawed sexism. We've outlawed anti-Semitism. We've outlawed anything. We're a completely equal society. That, of course, was bull, but that was the propaganda that they were putting out. And who would want to believe that? An interracial couple would want to believe that they could have a better life in the Soviet Union than they could have in the United States. But then, you know, and this is a conversation that I've often had with soap writers, that Black is not a personality. Virgin is not a personality. Deaf is not a personality. People need a larger personality than an immutable characteristic. So other than being an interracial couple, they needed to have lives. And once again, we're back to write what you know. What do I know about? I know about soap operas. And that's when I came up with the scenario. Let's say you have a soap opera on the radio. Let's say it has a name like The Guiding Light. Those important, because that's what it did at the time. Let's say that's a radio soap opera.
It certainly did until the 1970s.
Yes, exactly. That's why it's called The Guiding Light.
Yeah.
And let's say you hire an actor for The Guiding Light to voice a character. It's the radio. Nobody can see you on the radio. And let's say you
Very
hire
clever idea. Very clever idea.
Thank you. Let's say you hire an African-American actor. And now the show is transitioning to television. Well, what are you going to do now? And what if the woman who is a producer on the show is the woman who is dating the Black man? What do you do then? And what if you work for a formidable, incredible force of nature by the name of Erna Phillips? And this is where things get very interesting, because Erna Phillips was I didn't know her, you didn't know her, but I actually did quite a bit of research, both on books that had been written about her, documentation that we had back when we were both at P&G. And Erna is a woman who liked things her way. I mean, there are numerous stories of actors
Good way of putting it.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. We'll build.
Yeah.
We'll build like we'll build like this is Monday and we'll build to a Friday
Yeah.
cliffhanger. So, there's multiple stories of actors being fired because they said something rude to Erna. And then there's one of my favorite stories about Erna is that once the show was already on television, it was Procter & Gamble who decided they want to take it to color because it had been in black and white. And Erna didn't like any ideas that weren't Erna's ideas. So she was forced to do a test of a color episode, but she wrote the entire episode to be set in an operating room. So it was all just white on white. That was Erna's way of saying, no. You don't decide when my show goes to color. I decide when my show goes to color, which is the attitude that I took to, yes, Erna was willing to hire this African-American actor for the radio because it's the radio. And Erna says the show always comes first. And if he truly was the best candidate for the role, absolutely. But now it's time to switch to television. Erna actually paid out of her own pocket to shoot the pilot for the television of Guiding Light, because at the time, PNG TV was a fad. It wasn't going to go anywhere because who would want to stay in the same room and have to be able to watch something? No, radio, you can move around the house. You can do whatever you want. People aren't going to want to sit in front of a device and stare at it. TV's a fad. It's never going to last. But Erna paid out of her own pocket to shoot a television pilot for Guiding Light. And for years, they shot the radio show and the television show simultaneously. People would go to the studio, they would shoot the radio episode, then they would shoot the TV episode because Erna was she was confident about the TV, but again, she wanted the backup. And in fact, the sponsors wanted the backup. So for a couple of years, it was both. And Erna was not going to risk her television debut, what she had paid for herself by putting an African-American actor on the screens. And here's the thing. I just said all these things. That never happened. That's something that it might have happened. For all we know, it did happen. It just never ended up in the archives. But here is sort of the crux of writing historical fiction, the main dilemma. I didn't create real people. They created themselves. I put them in this story. I have Erna Phillips. I have Sharita Bauer, who played Bert. I have Theo Goetz, who played Papa Bauer. I have a quick appearance by Agnes Nixon, who was one of Erna's proteges and would then go on to create, My Children and One Life to Live and Loving. So I put all these real people in a story that didn't happen. And I gave them opinions and attitudes that I think are accurate based on the research I did. They never happened.
Yeah, it's a fascinating turn. Did you ever contemplate someone else other than Erna as and Rose?
Yeah. Well, here's what I could have done, and here's what some historical fiction people do: is they change a couple of names. Like there was a movie that came out, I believe, in the 1970s called, The Greek Tycoon. And here you see if this is a situation that the writers made up. So he was a self-made Greek tycoon who married an American woman whose husband was the president, and he had been killed, and his brother was the attorney general. Now, clearly, this was a completely fictitious situation because can you imagine in real life? First, what president would make his brother the attorney general? Nobody would stand for that. Furthermore, how many presidents have been assassinated whose wives then went on to marry Greek tycoons? Clearly, this is a completely fictional story. And people do that all the time. Like they'll fictionalize it just a little bit and everybody knows who it's supposed to be. And I consider doing that. I could have made up, instead of Erna Phillips, Myrna Phillips or something. But I decided in the end, what would be the point? The fact is, why do a fake Erna Phillips when I might as well at least give some credit? Because here's the thing. People need to know that this woman, this, orphan from Chicago, invented an entire genre. The reason they're called soap operas is, as you know, because she did them in conjunction with P&G and P&G sold soap to the point where their studios were called Port Ivory because Ivory soap was paying for everything.
It's
which
amazing
is why
when you tell someone today still and that they didn't realize that that's the case.
Yeah. Well, what's
as
funny,
someone,
I was going to just say on Beyond the Gates, they keep every scene that Nicole is in, she keeps spraying Febreze, and people are like, what is she doing? Why is she keep spraying Febreze? And then there was a shot of Jacob and Naomi in bed together, and there was a big can of Tide. Sort of, I don't know about you, I don't really keep Tide in bed with me.
No, I don't either, but I have not noticed those things, but I watch with my iPad, like as I get ready. And
well, and then so she's feeding him dessert in bed and she spills some chocolate and she's like, oh, don't worry, I have Tide. And people are like, what is this? And I'm like, children, this is a soap opera.
This is what is paying for this to be on the air.
No, it's like Erna Phillips would say, hold my beer, because this is what the shows were created to do. They were created to sell products. And so I actually find it really funny that people are shocked that Beyond the Gates, which is partially also owned by Procter & Gamble, has Febreze all over the place. So yes, but that was all Erna. To go back to it, this is a woman who created an entire genre. So if I'm going to base a character on her, I might as well give her credit where credit is due.
100%. And I'm so glad you did. If you, as the writer, the reporter, the soap lover that you are, were sitting opposite Ms. Erna Phillips, what would be the one question you'd love to ask her?
Well, probably I'd be so intimidated. I just kind of go, yes, you're right. Whatever you say, you are correct. Well, how she used to write her shows is she used to dictate them. And she used to Rose, her assistant Rose, in a stream of consciousness that, and she would play all the characters and she would just dictate like that. I would actually be curious for her, how her process worked, because for me, I can't dictate. I have to, it has to be done through my fingers. And I would love to hear sort of whether she was visualizing the scenes or whether she was acting out the scenes. I'd be curious about her process because that's a really interesting way to do it.
I love that. I was curious. I'm so glad. Talk about how much of Go On Pretending is also, which you said a little, based on your life.
Well, here's the thing. You know how at the beginning of all books it says no characters represented are related to anyone living or dead? So that's my official disclaimer. So here's the thing. My daughter is 18, and there was a scene that I was writing for later on after Rose and Jonas end up in the Soviet Union, and their daughter Emma grows up in the Soviet Union, but then she comes to the United States. And so I asked my daughter, I said to her, okay, I need you to do this. I need you to pretend that you're the daughter of a Russian Jewish soap opera writer and an overeducated Black man. And my daughter went, I think I can do that. And then I said to her, so if that were you, and we had actually just gone to Moscow in 2019, so she could actually see what a homogeneous society it is. And I asked her, if you had grown up in Moscow as the daughter of these people, and you came to the United States, to New York in particular, what would strike you? What would you sort of notice on the streets? And my daughter actually said something that I would have never thought of. She said hair. She said, I would have been so blown away by the different types of hair and the different hairstyles, how you can wear your hair in so many different ways. So I ended up using that in the book as what Emma observes. But to answer your question, how much of it is based on my life? Well, none at all. That's a good way of saying, in my first historical fiction, The Nesting Dolls, as my oldest son said, I don't know why people think the characters of Gideon and Zoe are based on you, because Gideon grew up in New York City, went to private school, and then went to Caltech. And Dad grew up in New York City, went to private school, and then went to MIT. So it is so obvious that they are completely different people. I don't know why people keep asking.
Any soap fan picking up this book would fall in love with it immediately because of the Erna and the Guiding Light and Rose, all of that. Your love of the genre comes off every page.
I hope so. I hope so, because while, and as you know, when you love something, you have fun with it. And when you critique it, it's because you love it. It's actually very hard to genuinely critique something that you don't love. So yes, I hope that that comes through, that yes, it's ridiculous. The fact is, sometimes the dialogue on soaps can be ridiculous. Sometimes the situations on soaps can be ridiculous, but there's always sort of this core of
clones. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how many people don't know someone who's come back from the dead, or let's say their entire family? But the fact is that there's still a genuine emotion underneath. How would you react if someone you loved came back from the dead? Is the situation slightly ridiculous? Yes. But the emotion is real. So when I play around with soap tropes and acknowledge that sometimes they can be silly, it's because of love. It's out of love. So I'm actually so glad that you said that came through, because I hope that was genuine. And then there's also the little Easter eggs that I've planted, which you picked up on.
Yeah,
that the spin-off.
Find Your Light makes its way into the book.
Yeah, exactly.
You have a book launch party this Saturday, May 3rd at 6 p.m.
I do. It's in
Brooklyn.
Everybody. It's in a very sweet little bookstore called My Biblioteca. It's in Brooklyn, and it's going to be both in person and remote. So if people want to join to watch remotely, they can. There will be a streaming component, but the in-person component will have Soviet food. I'm thinking tiny pickles. Let's see. And so here's the thing. I asked people, what should I serve at my Soviet book launch? And the number one item that people suggested was caviar. And I'm like, people, how much money do you think writers make? But but maybe I might get a little jar for effect, because that would be kind of cute. But definitely I'm thinking little pickles, and I'm thinking maybe pirashki, which are like little dumpling things. And I'm thinking some Russian candy, which is like sort of pure sugar. So if you come in person Saturday, My Biblioteca, you can Google it, Go On Pretending Alina Adams book launch on May 3rd. If you come in person, there will be Soviet snacks. If you watch remotely, I can show you the Soviet snacks, but it'll be hard to get them.
Novella Princess says Palpatine in Star Wars came back from the dead and people lost their minds.
Yes, yes, they did. And they didn't even explain it by something good, like they were on an island or they had amnesia. In fact, the crawl, now this is how geeky I am. The crawl says somehow Palpatine has returned from the dead. That wouldn't fly on a soap. What do you mean somehow? Give me a really good reason. Like, I don't know, a villainous family kept them on ice for 30 years. Yeah, that's a good reason. I believe that. They should have said that about them.
So you just mentioned, and I need to ask, taking the family to the Soviet Union in 2019.
Well, it wasn't the Soviet Union by then, to be fair. It was Russia by then.
Russia. So sorry. Good. I need a history lesson. I mean, still, what was that like?
It's difficult to describe.
Before that moment in 2019, when was the last time you had been there?
The last time I was there was in 1995. I was working for 1996. Yeah, 1995, 96. I was working for ABC Sports in their figure skating department, and we went to Moscow and we went to St. Petersburg because we were shooting features with the skaters. But here's the interesting part. So the time I had been there before that was 1988. My mother and I went back in 1988, and because that was right after Gorbachev comes to power, and that's when he sort of opens the country, which is interesting because in Go On Pretending, the reason that Rose and Jonas go to the Soviet Union in 1957 is they go for the 1957 World Youth Festival, which is when, yes, the Soviet Union threw a pro-democracy festival. That's amusing all in its own way. But it was because of this was right. Yeah. So that takes them
around the world at the moment.
Yeah, but in 1957, the Soviet Union throwing a pro-democracy festival.
Yeah, right. In 57, correct.
But it was because Nikita Khrushchev was in power and he had just exposed all of Stalin's crimes. And this was right after the 20th Party Congress, where he explained about Stalin's death camps and the executions and everything else. So Nikita Khrushchev was trying to show the world, no, we're the new and we're the better Soviet Union. We are open, we are democratic, we have a little bit of free press. So it was actually a very similar moment in 1957 for the World Youth Festival, which is why Rose and Jonas end up going to the Soviet Union. In 1988, my mother and I went to the Soviet Union because Gorbachev had come to power. And he was pretty much saying the same thing. This is the new wonderful Soviet Union. And so up until that point, we would have never considered going back, because we would have been afraid that we couldn't come back to the United States. But there was a brief, and at the time we thought, for all we know, this is a very brief window, because the Soviet Union tends to operate in windows. Like the 1950s, there was the brief which they called Khrushchev's thaw. And then when we immigrated in the 1970s, there was a very brief window where Jews were allowed to leave the Soviet Union. So you never know when things are going to open and close. So my mother and I went in 1988. And at the time, because it was still the Soviet Union, you'd be walking down the street and then suddenly there'd be these huge signs saying, glory to the Soviet Union, or, long live communism. Just these huge banners were everywhere. That was 1988. Just a couple of years later, when I went there in 1995, if I were an alien who landed in Moscow, I would think that I was in the city of Kit Kat in the country of Marlborough, because all of the communist banners had been taken down and in their place was advertising everywhere. It was just like there's this big splash. It's sort of like when we were coming to the United States, my parents said they thought that all of America looked like Times Square. They thought that all of America would be, the big lights and the advertising. So when I was there in the Soviet Union in the mid 90s, suddenly advertising was allowed and it was just everywhere. By the time we went back in 2019, it had sort of been tapered down. And now it sort of looked pretty much like almost any other it looked like pretty much any other European city. Moscow is actually based on rings, and it's 3 rings. It's a city that's arranged like that. My husband said he always felt like he was tilting when he was walking because the whole city is based on circles. But it was different in the sense that, like, the reason we went there is because my oldest son was doing an internship there. So we took the younger 2 kids and we visited. And one of the things that my son told my husband is he said, well, always make sure that you're wearing a nice shirt and a sports jacket, because otherwise they might look at you and they might think you're an African immigrant here to steal their jobs. And you don't want those problems. And the same kind of things, like when we would go to museums, I would go and I would buy the tickets so we wouldn't get charged the foreigner prices. But by the time we went to Moscow, it was not the place. It was not the Soviet Union. Actually, to put it very simply, it was not the Soviet Union in the sense just that it didn't look like it. It looked a lot like pretty much any other European city. But of course, all this stuff percolated underneath. And that's the interesting, because as I said, that the reason that Rose and Jonas in Go On Pretending end up moving to the Soviet Union is because they believe what they say about how they've outlawed racism and they've outlawed anti-Semitism. Yeah, it wasn't true then. It's not true now, but it's almost like they're not even pretending. Oh, go on pretending. It's not like they're even pretending anymore that that's the case.
Was it difficult letting your son do his internship there?
Oh yeah. My parents were thrilled. I cannot put it into words. So yeah, it was.
Your parents shared their thoughts very deeply with you.
They did, and to say they were thrilled would just be to give a whole new meaning to the word. So
yes, I see Pinocchio out on the street.
No, it was hard. But the fact is, I'm that mom. I'm the one who just says things. Yeah, try it. That'll be exciting. That'll be fun.
I mean, I give him credit for even doing it. I mean, that is really something.
Yeah, he had done a gap year between high school and college where he actually lived in Moldova, which is a former Soviet republic. He had lived there for a year. And it was actually a program for the United States State Department. I called it the Junior Spies of America program. They said, no. It's just for the learning of vital languages. Here are the vital languages that you learn from this non-Junior Spies of America program: Russian, Korean, Mandarin, Farsi, vital for what? So my son did the Russian program. So he actually lived there for almost a year and studied Russian.
Wow. I don't even know all of and I don't even know the words, but interracial, Russia, United States, what are the words that you use to educate your kids about, Scott and you are somewhat from very different places, and
well, we like to say we're interracial, interfaith, intercultural. Those are the three things.
Right. So, that it's a lot. So it's like, and they look like Scott a lot, right?
They do. They do.
So, and we live in, unfortunately, a very sad society that doesn't always accept us for what we look like or who we are, Jews, gays, blacks, all of it. But you have so much history between the two of you. It's like I'm just fascinated. Like, how do you lead them on a path, and educate them about both of your worlds and how to deal, sort of what Rose and Jonas are dealing with in the book. You said there's a moment that I referenced earlier. I'll let people come to it. Happened to you. I mean, those are real things.
Everything. In fact, that's the other thing. Everything that happens to Rose and Jonas in New York, because they are an interracial couple, happened to us in one form or another. I might have changed some details. So that's actually all of it's authentic. But here's the thing. You know how young people love the word trauma? It's their favorite word. Very often I will mention something to my kids about my life, and they go, let's unpack that. And I go, let's not, because basically the things that are called trauma, I call life. And I mean, to just turn this around a little bit on you, Alan, I mean, I've actually told my kids about your parents. I've told them about your mother being a hidden child. I talked about your father. Wasn't he living with the partisans at 13 years old in the woods?
Yeah, he lived in
yeah. And that's the whole thing. So I've actually referenced your father when my children think their lives are hard. And I explained to them that they are not. But I will also tell you that very often I think of the family that hid your mother. And that reminds me that there are good people in the world. And I will actually even tell you something else. So in the nesting dolls, as I said, there's a 1970s section, which is during the Jewish refusnik movement in the Soviet Union, where Jews were trying to leave the Soviet Union and they weren't allowed, and people were fired from their jobs, and people were forced to pay what's called a diploma tax, where basically before you left the country, you had to reimburse the Soviet Union for your education. And it was such an obscene amount of money that most people couldn't do it. And I remember talking to my mother about it at the time, and she said, when you write about the bad things, make sure that you mention the good people. She said, make sure that you mention that there were people who helped. Like she said, there were factories that took up collections so that the people could immigrate and pay the diploma tax. So when I think about the people who hid your mother, I think about what my mother said. Is she said, make sure that when you write about the bad things, you also remind that there are always good people, and that there are always people who will help at great risk to themselves. And when you ask, what do we tell our kids? We tell them about the bad things, but we also try to remind them that there are good people too.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm glad I asked, because you do. And, I wish I'd been talking about them a lot longer than I have. On that sort of subject, will you tell folks about the essay you wrote for the Jewish Book Council called "Do You Find the Interracial Jewish Family in My Novel Unbelievable?" Good.
So I may have received some feedback that I was told that I don't know how immigrant families work. And then I was told that I don't know know how Black interracial families work. And I remember telling my cousin about it. And I told her how people said, I don't know how immigrant families work. And she laughed. And then I said, and then I was told that I don't know how interracial relationships work. And there was this dead silence. And then she said, I'm sorry, I wasted all the laughing on the first one. I didn't have anything left for the second one. So, yes, I have been advised that when I write about a Soviet Jewish character who then dates or marries an African American one, that no Soviet Jewish family would ever accept this. Full stop, never. And if I say that that's possible, I am wrong. Just within my own family, much less other people that I know. And then I've also been told that the Black characters that I write, they're too educated, they're too erudite, and here's the main one. They have interests outside of being Black. They don't sit around and talk about being Black. And I will tell you a story from our days at Guiding Light. Do you remember when I think it was Rick and Mel were together for a while? Yeah. They were married for a while, and then they had a daughter. Yeah. And we actually did like even a little voting thing on the baby's name, something we did on the website.
Leah. And Leah Bauer.
Leah was the name they came up with, but we came up, and it was actually my suggestion because I wanted them, this is just a moment about me. I wanted them to name the baby Leslie because Rick's mother had been Leslie, and she was a character that nobody had ever really remembered after Leslie died. By the way, one of the characters I think killed off because Erna was in a bad mood that day. But Leslie, and I thought it would be a nice tribute for the fans because they never mention Rick's mother, and who cares what the baby's name was, really? But instead, it was changed higher up. They combined Leslie and Felicia, which was Mel's mother's name, and came up with Leia. But and anyway, and at the time, I remember being told that somebody, I will not mention who it was at P&G who actually said this to me, that they didn't think the name was Black enough. And I said, you know, I can't speak for all Black people. In fact, I can't speak for any, but I can say that my husband can go, I don't know, minutes, nay hours without thinking about being Black. He has other interests. For instance, Palpatine. We might spend some time discussing how Palpatine came back. He's a big
I believe Scott would.
Yes. He's a big comic book fan. We are an incredibly sexy couple, and we talk about education policy because he's a teacher and I also write about education. So we have many, many interests that are outside of us being an interracial couple. In fact, we don't spend our days discussing it. It might come up in conversation sometimes.
Hey, you look white today.
You're looking pretty. Well, actually, though, sometimes we will be, funny enough, sometimes we'll be sitting there and we like be holding hands and he'll look at them in contrast and go, wow, you're really white. Because I am very, very white. In fact, there was a TV show called Two Broke Girls where one of the characters, Kat Dennings, she brought in there was a Black character, and the blonde girl said to her, oh, is this your father? And she says, yes. And my mother was a piece of chalk. And my oldest son laughed at that so hard that he literally fell off the couch. So to this day, sometimes I am a piece of chalk. That this is absolutely true, but it is not a main topic of discussion at our house. And the fact that I write about interracial couple who have other interests, like in the case of Rose and Jonas in Go On Pretending, he's an actor, she's a writer. They are trying to stage a Marxist version of Othello, which is also kind of funny, but that's a separate issue. They have interests that are outside of discussing whatever immutable characteristic they may have brought to the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, you think back, how lucky we are, which we'll get to and talk more about beyond the gates. But, we didn't do Black well on Guiding Light. There were moments.
It was, well, to be fair, the contract players on Guiding Light, here is their first Black cast on the Guiding Light contract players. You have Billy D. Williams, James Earl Jones,
I know,
Cecily Tyson, BBD. So for a while we had to, well, let's put it this way. Guiding Light let go of some excellent talent.
Yes. Taye Diggs, Kevin Mambo, Monty Sharp, Terrell Tilford, Victoria Platt.
Nia Long.
Yes, Ivana, I love to death.
Yeah. So
we almost had Ivana and Murray Bartlett together interracially.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, that's right. I remember there was like a blurry
at the end. That was Jill Laurie and my idea.
Yeah, no, that would have been so much pretty, as the young people say. That would have been so much.
That would have been overwhelming pretty. Yeah,
that
would have been
too much.
Overwhelming pretty.
But to be fair, most soaps don't do anything.
Correct.
Anything outside of a certain box. Well, to be fair.
Very, very, very true. I mean, we could talk about gay, but anyway, let's talk about the tie-ins. Oakdale Confidential led to a New York Times.
Yeah, it was in 2006. It was done as a tie-in to the show's 50th anniversary, which, remember, we did a lot of events for that. And the premise was that this was a book that was sort of like, I guess, Peyton Place-ish, in the sense that within the story in Oakdale, a mystery writer had written this tell-all book about, it was Carly, Katie, and Maddie. Those were the three women. I remember you doing that photo shoot with the three women. Yeah. And so it was a big sort of mystery and scandal who wrote this book. It turned out to actually be Katie, but for a while Nancy claimed that she had done it. So you had actually mentioned Helen Wagner. So that was part of it. And so that came out in conjunction with As the World Turns 50th anniversary, and it spent 2 weeks at number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. For anyone who said then or now that soaps are dead, maybe they're not what they were, at the height of the Luke and Laura days, but the fact is they could still put a book on the New York Times bestseller list. So that was Oakdale Confidential.
They certainly. So was it Mickey or Bill who came? How did this idea come? Do you remember?
We were all talking about what we were going to do for the 50th, which was going to be a major year. And my suggestion was, because, so here's the thing, P&G owned As the World Turns, but it aired on CBS. And the parent company for CBS also owned Simon & Schuster. So it was
yes, I remember. Yes, we had a meeting with Simon & Schuster.
Yeah. Yes. So it was actually.
I need a jog up here sometime.
It took a long time. It was almost 20 years ago, Al.
Yeah.
So
we went over there.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. With the editor, with Maggie Crawford, who was the editor, and
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so that went through Mickey, and then we did that for 2006. And then it did so well after it had, hit the New York Times bestseller list that Christmas, they released a special Christmas edition which actually, because the first one was released under anonymous, because since the whole mystery was who had written it.
Right,
the book
who wrote it on the show.
In the real world was anonymous. The one that came out for Christmas, a special edition, which had a new prologue and a new epilogue, was by Katie Peretti with Alina Adams. So even though I did all the work, I got the second billing. And because, imaginary people, they never carry their share of the work. Because, Terry Kahn is a real person. Katie Peretti is not. So, so that was the first one. That one came out, and that one was done. The second edition was the Christmas of that year, because the anniversary, As the World Turns, is in the spring, right? There's a time when I could do this off the top of my head. I could remember the date of As the World Turns, but it is in the spring. And then this was for Christmas. And then after that, the following year, we did the Guiding Light tie-in Jonathan story. And that one was different because Oakdale Confidential took the real sort of like a real story, a mystery, and then fictionalized it, but used real characters like Katie and Carly and Maddie Coleman. So that was something that had happened. In story was the fact that the book was published, but the story in the book was not something that happened on the air. It had Craig and it had Sierra and it had the character that had been on back in the like in the 80s. It had Ariel, so it had all sorts of. This was me basically taking my favorite characters and shoving them in there. But Jonathan's story was different. Our concept for Jonathan's story was different because Tom Pelfrey had left the show as Jonathan had left the show and taken his and Lizzie's baby, Sarah, with him. And then Tom came back for a short stint. I want to say maybe like a 6 weeks or something like that. And so Jonathan's story was different because it was the real story of what had happened to Jonathan while he was off the canvas, which is a very different approach. And then that pulled in Alan and Reva, and they had committed a murder off screen. And the whole premise was that suddenly Alan and Reva left town to look for Jonathan. And then these two characters who on and off hated each other came back, and suddenly they were the best of pals. And that had something to do with Jonathan, and that was the mystery. So the concept was very different because it was actually real as opposed to not real. It's like we're working at multiple levels of real here, and that it's all pretend. But Oakdale Confidential was a pretend story about a pretend story, and Jonathan's story was a real story about a pretend story.
Say that 10 times and keep track of that.
So that was a very different concept, and that also did very well. I think that made the top 10 of the New York Times bestseller list. And then we did one more tie-in book. We did The Man from Oakdale, which was, again, written by Henry Coleman and Alina.
I was going to say it was Henry, yeah.
It was Henry. It was The Man from Oakdale. And that was not something that happened for real, but it was actually part of Henry's paranoia of what might happen. So, yeah. They were all very different, and that one won the Scribe Award, and the Scribe Award is that's given for best tie-in book. So that book won the International Scribe Award at Comic-Con, which was super cool. We got to go to Comic-Con. Well, Scott and I remember that. It did. I'll show you. Actually, I have the little prize somewhere here. It's somewhere on my shelf. It's like a cute little trophy. They give that at Comic-Con. So that was fun. Where we also went to discuss how Palpatine came back to life. You see how this all
So, well, yes, I mentioned it earlier. We really haven't had a chance to talk about Beyond the Gates. So, the news broke last year that CBS, the NAACP, and our old boss P&G were going back into the soap business.
I know. Is that the most, like, did you have that on your bingo card ever?
Never in a million years. What was your reaction? Not only, P&G, a soap opera, a black soap opera, all combination with CBS, the NAACP, and P&G. What were your thoughts?
Well, my first thoughts, I think, were like everybody else, this is never going to happen. This is just, how many times have we had shows? How many times have we heard that All My Children is coming back as a series of TV movies, or we're going to do this spin-off, and it never happened. So I think my first thought was, okay, look, another development deal. I'm happy a writer has a development deal. Michelle Valjean is a fabulous writer. I'm so happy she has a development deal. But no way is this ever going to happen. And then it happened.
And then they announced Tamara, Carly, and Daphne.
Yeah. And not to mention the incredible Susan Dansby, who we both know from As the World Turns as the script editor there. So that is a stacked deck. Also, if I may,
Danielle Page.
Page, yes.
A ton of P&G people
have been stressing the fact that this is the first it's not all black soap opera, it's majority black soap opera. But here's something that I think really got lost in the shuffle. This is the first show to be executive produced and head written by a woman in forever, because all 4 shows up in the air. Days of Our Lives just replaced their writing team, so they now have women writing. But for the last almost decade, we have had soaps. I would like to go on the record as saying a women's medium. There's a lot of men who are soap fans. My own husband grew up watching All My Children. Perfectly fine, but it was a women's medium. It was a women created for women by women. For a decade, we mostly had male executive producers and male head writers. So I think I'd like to throw into the mix, first and foremost, about Beyond the Gates, is that it's phenomenal that you have women who are both head writer and executive producing. And they did a red carpet premiere of the Beyond the Gates at the Paley Center in New York. And I covered that. And they put the executive producer from P&G in front of me, their choice. And so I being me, and as you can all tell, I'm very shy and retiring and don't like to talk. They put her in front of me and I had a microphone, and well, that was just asking for it. I said, so if this show is a success, can we see As the World Turns and Guiding Light back? And Another World too, let's throw that in there. Why not? And she gave me a very political dancing around an answer, but I did ask. So for the record, I did ask, and it's just.
I mean, did you watch the week leading up to Beyond the Gates?
Yeah,
with the mistake.
Oh,
on
yes.
The air
yes.
About, the longest running show, and they showed As the World Turns, or said As the World Turns.
Yes, and they could have just qualified it with, to debut on TV, or there's ways. I
mean, it should have never made it to air as a mistake coming from CBS and PMG.
I worked many years for the Daytime Emmys as a researcher for the Daytime Emmys. So you can always make anything sound unique, to the point where this is the first actor with brown eyes wearing a blue suit who has won this award. You can always narrow it with something. But what they went with was just so wrong. That's the word we're looking for, wrong. But yes, I did watch that lead up to it. And I have been watching Beyond the Gates. But see, here's the thing. It's Beyond the Gates is more than Beyond the Gates. The show in and of itself is almost the smallest piece of it. The biggest part of it is what this means. Is this going to bring the genre back to life? Is this going to prove? I mean, the fact is all the shows have always had a very large Black audience, a disproportionately Black audience to the population. So, because here's the thing, it's all about money. And I don't have a problem with that. Money is a great way to keep score. If something makes money, it's going to be on the air, no matter how somebody feels about it personally, which is beautiful. Because you can be horribly, horribly racist. But if you're running a network and a Black show is making you money, you're going to put a Black show on the air like God intended. So I'm actually perfectly fine with that. So this show, it almost like is too much on its shoulders. Because the problem is, if this show doesn't do well, people are going to say, oh, a woman-run show won't do well, or a Black show won't do well, when that's not what it means. It's not like when a Marvel movie fails at the box office, people go, well, a movie produced by a white guy, we shouldn't make any more of those because those don't make money. That doesn't happen. So that's Beyond the Gates is carrying so much on its shoulders that in a way it's terrifying, but it's also exciting.
Are you enjoying it?
I'm enjoying aspects of it. I will be completely honest, but I have never watched any show where I have loved every single storyline.
Yep.
I think, tomorrow's
You'd be lying.
Yeah, you'd be lying. Tomorrow's always great. Carla Mosley is actually, I think, really showing what she can do. I mean, she was always fine on other shows. She was never bad. And then, her stint on The Bold and the Beautiful was certainly very interesting, but they're really sort of letting her shine. Daphne, I think, is finally being able to show what she can do, where again, she was fine on other shows, but again, the role she played on Passions, no one can pull off that role. I mean, that was, she's, I think some of the young cast are really, they're getting there. Cause Alan, you remember we were especially, As the World Turns went through a period where they hired a lot of young, very attractive people of different levels of acting ability, but they all worked super hard and they improved from episode to episode to episode. And there are definitely some young people on Beyond the Gates where I think like when we see them a year from now, they're going to be phenomenal because they are literally improving from episode to episode to episode.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm enjoying it. Carla, Tamara, thank God somebody, underused on As the World Turns for so long.
Absolutely.
She was used well.
But, this is one of the things I asked her, because she was also on that red carpet premiere that I covered, is that, the thing with Jessica on As the World Turns, and with so many minority characters, and minority that can work for race and sexuality and religion and everything else, they're put in a box because they have to be good and they have to be perfect and they have to represent, because anytime you go a little bit to the side, people go, well, that's a very negative connotation. You can't show a character character like that way. So the fact is, one of the things I asked Tamara is, what brought you back to daytime? Because, she's been doing really well. I mean, she's on Law and Order, and was in like the feature films with Keanu Reeves and Al Pacino, or the devil's advocate. No, she's been doing really great. So I asked her, what brought you back to daytime? And she said it was this part. And it was the opportunity for these characters to finally be messy. That was the word that was sort of used a lot that night, is that they no longer have to be the model minority, no matter what minority they are. So that is very exciting, in that when it's a whole cast, then you're going to have good people and bad people, just like you do in real life. Did you know that people of different ethnicities, races, religions, sexualities, gender, some of them are terrible and some of them are wonderful, and most of them are a little bit of both.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch. It really has. And to see,
every soap, 6 months, the first 6 months, they're just figuring out who they are. And this is actually a classic example where, when I mentioned one of the things that my husband and I talk about, sometimes he gets lectures on the history of soaps, whether he asks for them or not. And one of the things that I was telling him is, okay, Loving premieres in the early 1980s, I believe, created by Agnes Nixon, the woman who created All My Children and One Life to Live, and Doug Marland, the man who won Emmys for Guiding Light and As the World Turns and all the things. So these two phenomenal, experienced, powerhouse soap creators create Loving, and the first 6 months are a mess. If you look at the first 6 months of Loving, they had no idea what was going to work. Half the cast was replaced in the first 6 months. Entire characters and story arcs were written out. And this is Agnes Nixon and Doug Marland. Here's another example, also a lecture I gave my husband. When the Colbys premiered, a spin-off.
Love the Colbys.
I love the Colbys too. But here's the thing. So the Colbys premieres, created by Aaron Spelling. If anybody knows how to make television, it's Aaron Spelling and Richard and Esther Shapiro, who also know what they're doing. And they create this show, and they cast Charlton Heston and Barbara Stanwyck and Catherine Ross and this British unknown nobody has ever heard of called Stephanie Beacham. And within the first hour of the show, Stephanie Beacham, the least known member of the cast, by the end of that hour is a fan favorite. And they set up this triangle where Jason Colby, Charlton Heston, has been married to Sable Colby, Stephanie Beacham, for an unknown number of years, because it's soaps and you can never figure out why people are only 10 years younger than the people playing their children. An issue Beyond the Gates needs to work on, side note. But they claim that Charlton Heston has been in love with Catherine Ross, his sister-in-law, the whole time. And Aaron Spelling and Richard and Esther Shapiro make the gamble that because Catherine Ross is familiar to audiences from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Graduate, people are going to root for Jason to get together with Frankie, not realizing what they have on screen with Stephanie Beacham, who wins over the fans, even though she's the bad person. And they play that story out for a year as if they believe Jason and Frankie are the rooting couple when they're not. And this is Aaron Spelling. My point being, not just that I get passionate about these things, but that even incredibly experienced people never know how their stories are going to play until they hit the air. And even then, they sometimes stubbornly stick to what they think the viewers should want when it's so obvious that the viewers want something else.
Amen to that. Tell me, do you watch other shows currently?
Well, I do, because I work for Soap Hub, which is a site that covers all the shows. So I watch The Young and the Restless, and I watch Days of Our Lives, and I write about them, and I tune into General Hospital periodically. The only one I do not watch is The Bold and the Beautiful. My apologies to all the people who love The Bold and the Beautiful. I have never been able to get into The Bold and the Beautiful. I was also a little petty because it replaced Capital, which I really did like. And I was in high school at the time. And in high school, you get.
I really did like Capital as well, to be honest.
So yeah, Bold and Beautiful replaced it, but that's the only one that I'm aware of what's going on, and I certainly know the cast, but that's not one that I watch regularly.
What are you liking on what you're watching?
You really put me on the spot there, huh? Let's see. The Young and the Restless is very pretty. It has a very nice lighting. No, here's the thing. On The Young and the Restless, I really liked Adam and Sally, Mark Grossman and Courtney Hope. I really liked that couple. I thought Guiding Light had finally struck gold, and they decided to break them up.
You mean Young and the Restless?
Yeah, sorry, Young and the Restless. Sorry, they all merge in my head after a while. Yes, on The Young and the Restless, decided to break them up, so I don't get it. But then I'm not Josh Griffin. And let's see. Days of Our Lives. I can genuinely say the guy who plays EJ, I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name, Dan Feringal. Is that how you pronounce it? You would think someone whose maiden name is Severinovsky would be more respectful of people with complicated names, but I think he's fabulous. I was just saying to someone the other day, he should get all the prizes. The guy can do anything. He can play drama. He can play comedy. He can play scenes where he's evil. He can play scenes where he's romantic. He can play scenes where he loves his mother. He can play scenes where he's, hoping his son will forgive him. He's even good with the child actress who plays Rachel. He is amazing. Give him all the awards.
Oh, I have to look him up. Did you like Colleen and Ray Wise together?
Oh, yeah, that was fun. And, I was actually chatting with Colleen on Facebook Messenger, and she was saying how after she did her first scene, Eric Braeden said to her, "Oh, they sent me a pro." And I'm like, yes, yeah. Colleen is a pro. We spent time with her on As the World Turns. Put any script in front of her, Colleen will make it work.
Yeah. They did gangbusters with that. That was fun.
And it was fun, actually, that they did it as a limited run, too, because with characters like that, you can't really let them run too long, but it was perfect. It was just the right length. It wasn't too long. It wasn't too short. And of course, and Ray Wise, talk about another pro. It's actually been fun. I think, was it a couple of years ago that the Emmys for guest starring performers was won by Ray Wise and Donna Mills? And I thought how perfect that was because, Donna Mills did incredible work on Knots Landing during a time period where, it's still true. It was a soap ghetto. Nobody was going to give her a primetime Emmy, even though the work she was doing had multiple layers. So I think it's so perfect that she did a guest run on General Hospital and wins the Emmy because she deserves it 1,000,000% for being Donna Mills.
100%. Before I let you go, are you writing the next one?
Well, I'm always writing something, but right now I'm actually trying something a little bit different because, as I mentioned, I also write a lot about education. So what my agent is actually shopping around is an NYC schools murder mystery. Because how remember the college scandal of a couple of years ago, Felicity Huffman, Lori Loughlin.
Of
all the things. Lori Loughlin, a daytime alum, Edge of Night, just got to work that in there. But the kind of stuff people do to get their kids to get into college, believe it or not, in New York City, they do that to get their kids into kindergarten. And so
I love that. That's phenomenal. That is phenomenal.
It's a comedic novel about what the New York City school scene is like. So that's actually what my agent is currently shopping around. So if anybody out there would like to publish a book on that topic, come to me.
I love that. Well, you'll have to come back and we'll have to actually get real moms to join.
Yeah. Oh, that would be really fun to sort of get around.
It really would.
But for now, it's
AlinaAdams.com, right?
Yes, it's AlinaAdams.com. The book is Go On Pretending. It's available anywhere. If your bookstore doesn't have it, make them order it. And if your public library doesn't have it, make them order it because that's good for me too. And if you enjoy it, please write a review on either Goodreads or on Amazon or wherever you do it. And my social media is on Instagram is I am Alina Adams. And you can actually find me on Facebook as Alina Severinovsky Wickham. If that's too hard to spell, there's also Alina Adams Media. So I'm
Patrick Irwin said Alina should be head of daytime for one of the networks. Lots of fantastic ideas.
Patrick, thank you. Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you for coming. And thank you, everybody who tuned in tonight. I really appreciate this. Has been super fun. I haven't talked soaps at anyone but my husband for a long time. So it's nice to get to
talk. Please say hello to your husband. And thank you for doing this. And keep up the great work, Alina. So good to see you, my friend.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you to author Alina Adams for spending the hour. Her brand new historical novel, Go On Pretending, is available where all books are sold. Please join me next Wednesday, May 7th at 8:30 p.m. when actor Zach Rabitis joins me live. Zach is the talented husband of As the World Turns alum Marnie Schulenberg. And as we approach the 3rd anniversary of Marnie's passing, Zach will give us an update and talk about his incredible new role on the incredible new Hulu series Dying for Sex, where he plays opposite Michelle Williams. If you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, you can do so down below. If you like today's episode, please click the like button. It always helps. And if you like to stream audio versions, just search The Locker Room on your favorite podcast app. I hope you all have a great weekend. And as always, please stay safe.